Chapter 1301, Incoming Ally. Michael and his army had their fair share of troubles. Following so close to the Vanderbilt army had allowed them to cruise along most of the time, but it seemed that they had truly gone into the deep end this time since there were a lot more concentration of magical monsters around them. Thankfully, they weren't anything that his army couldn't handle. Even Jakku could take a rest as the soldiers made quick work of those magical monsters. And in the meantime, they had, of course, gathered more visitors from the sparse adventuring parties that were lucky enough to cross paths with. In fact, there were a few returning adventurers who had come back to their camp to warn them. Sir Michael. The adventurers that approached Michael were the very same ones who had been the first few people who entered their mobile camp. This is not good news. The Vanderbilts and the Goldstones are getting pushed back because of those magical monsters. We think it's best for your army to retreat as well. This was a bit surprising for Michael to hear. The Vanderbilts and the Goldstones were two armies with significantly stronger and bigger numbers than the Rebornian army, and yet they weren't having as much trouble as them. Those magical monsters have some kind of weird power. They can cut off ability powers. What do you mean? It was at this point that his shadow orcs intervened. One of them appeared right in front of Michael, startling the adventurers that had been talking to him. Bu-22, the magical monsters seem to have some kind of ability to disrupt ability power communications, said the Orcanine. Ra-ta-ta, they're using these powers to create disruptions within the two armies, causing chaos and vulnerabilities which the magical monsters take advantage of, added an Orcupine. The adventurers nodded, furtively glancing at the orcs. They're right, Levi's armies are getting separated from each other. Each division can't communicate, leading to their sections separating into a disjointed unit. The shadow orcs scoffed at the adventurers. Your advice is not needed, Bu-22, no need to bother our supreme leader with such pointless problems. What? The adventurers couldn't believe this. How were the Rebornian army not panicking? Just a few kilometers northwards, hundreds of soldiers were dying each day. The very foundation of an army was their communication. Levi had about 50,000 troops around him while Teresa commanded about 30,000 people. With such large numbers, it was vital that they could easily pass down their commands to the individual troops, especially with the ever-changing battlefield in the chasm. That's how they were able to survive days after the magical monster's ambush. Levi was able to expertly maneuver his army to retreat while dealing as much damage to his opponents as possible. That wouldn't work if he couldn't pass down his commands to his soldiers within seconds of giving it. So, most large armies deployed magnetic messengers. These were cultivators who had the specific talent of transferring instructions to multiple different people at the same time. Levi would give the order to his generals. His generals would then give out the order to their messengers, who would then pass it to other messengers, and so on and so forth until the order was given to the individual soldier. This whole process would take place within seconds, thanks to the powers of the magnetic messengers. However, some kind of disruption here in the chasm had wrecked that entire plan. They didn't know if it was from the magical monsters themselves or a unique thing from the demi-humans, but what's important was that because of this, the chain of command in the army was completely shattered. The messengers were basically turned mute. They found themselves unable to use their divas or their ability powers. That's the reason why Levi wanted to retreat. He needed to consolidate his forces, make them more compact in order for the chain of command to have as little friction as possible. It should have been the reason why the Rebornian army should retreat. With only 15,000 troops, they were in severe danger of finding themselves targeted by the magical monsters. Oh well, we don't have to worry about that, Michael said offhandedly. In fact, you won't have to worry about them either. Introducing the Rebornian smartphone. Michael presented them the new phones they were starting to produce. He made its grand entrance with some magical sparklers to make it more enticing. Seeing this, the adventurers were speechless. Introducing the Rebornian smartphone, Michael said again, hoping to get a better reaction. Still, the adventurers were dumbfounded. Michael sighed, whatever, I'll just tell you what this phone can do. He led them to a different part of the Rebornian camp, a store that stood out like a sore thumb. It looked simplistic, just austere, white walls and a few desks here and there that displayed differently colored phones on stands. There were already some adventurers here, being attended by some Rebornian geniuses who were explaining to their customers about the features of the phone. And with this messenger app, you can talk to anyone in the world as long as you have their number. The adventurers had their jaws on the ground as they listened to the demonstration. No wonder the Rebornians weren't worried about the loss of communication. They were using a completely different system that didn't rely on ability powers. So wanna buy one? They. Levi's hair was in disarray as he stood, arms crossed, in front of their camp. A few minutes later, a new carriage came and approached him. Teresa walked out of the carriage looking fresh and lively compared to Levi, who looked like he'd been through hell. Teresa. Levi. Looks like your mission went well. I take it that you'll have your ally here soon. Teresa nodded. Yes, they have promised me that they will be venturing into the chasm for me. They'll be coming soon. Want me to tell them you said hi? Chapter 1302, Greeting from Afar. Levi bit his lips at the obvious provocation from Teresa. I'll greet them myself, surely they wouldn't ignore a Vanderbilt. Teresa laughed. Hiding behind your last name again, are you? Whatever, it's in all of our best interest that we all work together to deal with this problem, Levi said. What problems? Don't pretend you don't know. We have underestimated our opponents. These magical monsters are a lot faster, stronger, and more powerful than we thought. And somehow this chasm is making our communication go awry. That cannot be a coincidence. So, Teresa asked, seemingly uninterested. So this means that we're possibly dealing with something far more sinister than we initially thought. This time Teresa narrowed her eyes at him. Ersatz. Levi nodded. That's the only possible answer. How else are these demi-humans able to do these things? They cannot have tamed those magical monsters by themselves. Teresa began mumbling to herself as she began to think of the repercussions of this news. We'll handle it, she eventually said. No, you can't. We need to work together, insisted Levi. How convenient. Now that I've secured the help of the strongest independent military faction in the world, you suddenly want to work together. Levi grunted. The past doesn't matter. What matters now is that we deal with this problem now before it becomes bigger. You wouldn't want the bigger fish to be attracted to this place, would you? This time, even Teresa couldn't help but agree. They needed to control the chasm before her siblings became interested in this place, a sentiment that Levi shared. Do you think that with their help we can defeat these magical monsters and find the demi-human kingdom? Levi asked. They're the only way we can, Teresa solemnly answered. Just then, a messenger came towards Teresa and whispered in her ears. Her expressions immediately perked up at the good news. Oh, and speak of my guest, here they come. Let's all give a warm welcome to the strongest swordsman family in the entire world, the Lionhearts. Before they emerged from the darkness, their marching footsteps created tremors in the ground. Soldiers from both armies had to stop what they were doing and look back towards the emerging force that was now coming towards them. A flaming flag bearing the symbol of the Lionhearts waved proudly at the back. Thousands of powerful swordsmen surrounded the flag at all sides, each one having a tremendously intimidating aura that attracted everyone's respect. The Lionhearts earned the awe of everyone in the chasm, including the adventurers. Look, it's the Lionhearts. They're here. I didn't think they'd be joining a fight like this. But now that they're here, I'm a lot more confident about our chances here. Their reputation had spread far and wide. They were a family that excelled in the swords. Each and every single person of their lineage had exceptional talent in the sword, allowing them to create a powerful army that could stand toe-to-toe even against a conglomerate. Their skills in close-quarters combat will be extremely helpful in dealing with the magical monsters, said Teresa. When dealing with those brutes, a sword will always be the best play. Soon enough, a man with a burly stature approached both of the conglomerate leaders. Sir Caliburn, said Levi, bowing down in respect. Teresa curtsied in perfect form. Sir Caliburn, I am extremely pleased to have your presence here in the chasm. The Lionheart Patriarch nodded, but instead of focusing on the two conglomerate leaders, Caliburn seemed to have his focus elsewhere. He kept on looking around the cavern looking for something. Yes, well, you have something we need, Caliburn said. Teresa smiled. Yes, I am well aware of your need for the ice petals of the frozen lotus. If I recall, this ingredient is vital for the progression of your sword styles, is it not? Caliburn nodded. Correct. With the ice petals, those who are in the initial stage of our sword styles will find themselves increasing their firepower in a single burst. Hearing this, both Teresa and Levi were overjoyed. It is amazing to hear that the Lionhearts had increased your numbers. Are there any exceptional talents in your lineage that we need to know? The Lionheart Patriarch laughed and shook his head. You misunderstand, these ice petals are not for my family. This confused both Levi and Teresa. This didn't make sense at all. The ice petals were only effective for the Eternal Flame sword style, and only the Lionhearts could learn that sword style. So what did Caliburn mean when he said it was not for them? As we discussed, Teresa, my family will be lending you our soldiers for a brief moment in exchange for all the ice petals in your possession. Teresa nodded, still a little bit confused about the whole situation. Yes, but I hope that it will just be the start of our cooperation. Once this is over, I wish to have a conversation with you about. Caliburn raised his hand, stopping Teresa from saying anything more. Then Caliburn turned to somewhere far away and began waving his hands. Hey. Levi looked around, not knowing who Caliburn was talking to. Even Teresa was intrigued. Who, in this place, would interest the Lionheart Patriarch? Then they soon found the answer. Both Teresa and Levi's eyes narrowed as they saw a small group of people approaching them from afar. One of them was a youthful teen with golden hair, the Rebornian leader Michael. Next to him were a few soldiers and a dark blue-haired individual acting as his personal guards. Then right next to him was none other than Cerberus Augendor, the Mystic Master. Ah yes, Master Cerberus is here as well, Teresa said to Caliburn. He seems to be with a student of his. If you would like, we can arrange for you to meet, said Levi. Surely the Mystic Master would be delighted to hear that you wish to talk to him. But all this while Caliburn had been ignoring the two. His focus was entirely on one person. Michael, I'm back, he called out, causing the two conglomerate leaders to loosen their jaws to the ground. Chapter 1303, Glimpse of the Kingdom. Michael had no choice but to approach the two conglomerates. After all, Caliburn and his family were over there. He didn't expect this. A few weeks ago, Caliburn told him that he was off to fetch something out there, so he didn't expect to see the Lionhearts here in the chasm. And he especially didn't expect them to be chummy with the two conglomerates. I guess it makes sense. The Lionhearts are one of the most powerful families in the world. Of course, they have good ties with the conglomerates. Michael approached Caliburn with Jakku and a few of their trusted soldiers. It would do no good showing up with his entire army right now. Michael, I'm back! Caliburn greeted Michael with an intense hug, almost squeezing the breath out of the young Rebornian leader. Ruggs, yep, why are you here? Caliburn laughed. Ha ha ha, didn't expect that, did ya? Oh, have you met these guys yet? The Lionheart Patriarch turned to Levi and Teresa, who was currently undergoing a massive shock as they saw Caliburn being so close with Michael. Sir Caliburn, how do you know this person? Asked Teresa. Even before she knew the answer, she already had a feeling about what it was going to be. This guy, he's my friend, which means that we're allied with his company. It was at this point that both Levi and Teresa started shaking their heads, as if they couldn't accept this reality. After all, they'd all been told all their lives that the Lionhearts were untouchable. They were allied with the Oscorps, and they had a tight relationship that stemmed from Caliburn's childhood itself. And even then, the Lionhearts and the Oscorps could barely be even considered as an alliance. It was a business relationship based on a contract. The Lionhearts would give them soldiers and the Oscorps would pay them in turn, but they weren't fully allies. But now, Caliburn was fully depicting the Reborn Company as their ally. This was an explosive set of news that would shake the very foundation of the entire elite society. What do you mean?" Teresa asked, but before she could finish her words, Caliburn stopped her again. "The ice petals," Caliburn demanded. With such strong words, Teresa had no choice but to give the Lionheart patriarch the spatial ring that contained the ice petals that Lazarus gave her. Caliburn inspected the ring before giving it to Michael. "Here." Teresa started to choke up. The very item that she worked hard for, the very thing that she sacrificed time, money, and connections for, was given away just like that. She thought that she was doing Caliburn a favor. She thought that she was helping their family. But as it turned out, it wasn't even for them, it was for Michael. All this time, they'd treated the Reborn company as a fly on the wall, annoying but fundamentally harmless, so they didn't mind their presence at all. But now, suddenly, the paradigm has shifted. Reborn went from a successful business company to a powerful military force. The fact that they had allied with the Lionhearts already put them on the same level as most of the top upper echelon companies, if not better than them. They couldn't believe it, and so the question now plagued both Levi and Teresa. Why would the Lionhearts choose to abandon the Oscorp conglomerate and instead ally themselves with the Reborn company? "What is this for?" Michael asked Caliburn. "This is for your army," the Lionheart patriarch replied. "This is the ingredient that will help them increase their power in a single burst. Now originally, I wanted them to have these ice petals in order for them to have the sufficient firepower to survive the chasm. But as it turned out, it looks like they were plenty competent all on their own if you made it this far." "You taught them the eternal flame sword style?" Teresa asked. She didn't mean the words to sound so offended, but the shock inside her still lingered and influenced her emotions clearly. "That should be of no concern to you," Caliburn said. "But yes, Reborn has earned the right to learn our sacred fighting style." Cerberus all this while just kept nodding his head sympathetically. He was glad that someone was finally understanding the absurdity of the situation. "You guys don't even know the half of it," Cerberus whispered to Levi and Teresa. "Don't ask them about Jakku." The two conglomerate leaders ignored the Mystic Master's nonsensical words. They started to recalculate their perception of the Reborn company. When they first saw the 15,000 troops alongside Michael, they didn't think that they were anything impressive. In fact, they seemed a little bit too pretty. They didn't have the scars and battle merits that all good armies had on their soldiers. Did that army really deserve to learn the greatest sword fighting style in the entire world? Levi and Teresa would literally exchange all of their wealth in order to learn that sword style. It would increase their own armies by at least 3 times their original power. Their sentiment wasn't rare. In fact, other conglomerate leaders had the same idea. However, the fact that the Lionhearts kept this sword style to themselves prevented those dreams from coming true. And now it seemed that Reborn was able to do what no one had done before, yet again. Just as Levi was about to say something, a large explosion broke out from a distance, creating a brief instantaneous light that illuminated the dark cavern. Everyone turned to the direction of the disturbance, and immediately they felt the presence of numerous magical monkeys that were running towards them at full speed. "Damn!" Levi cursed. "Men at arms," he commanded. "Kolshin, start preparing your armies, we'll defend our base here," Teresa shouted at the top of her lungs. The resurgence of these creatures had forced the individual leaders to separate back into their own camps. Meanwhile, Michael looked towards the distance and saw a brief glance of something at the end of the cavern. "That's the demi-human kingdom." Chapter 1304, All Out Sea. Michael could feel thousands and thousands of light mana signatures behind that large rock wall. At first, it seemed like it was just another normal dead end in this endless dark maze, but Michael could tell that it was different. First of all, those magical monsters came from out of nowhere. Most of everyone who had encountered these creatures had long been used to the fact that they suddenly appeared out of nowhere even though there were no tunnels nor openings in which they could come out from. But now, Michael could clearly see that these monsters came from that rock wall. And perhaps the greatest evidence to his own theory was the fact that he could hear his shadow orc chieftains' voices echoing towards him. BU-22, Supreme Leader, can you hear me? Ra-ta-ta, reporting Supreme Leader, we can feel your presence close. Michael smiled and communicated to his shadow orcs, don't worry, we're about to enter into the demi-human kingdom. Supreme Leader, we have currently infiltrated their ranks. Although we were not able to go in too deep, we have sensed that they have some kind of powerful cultivator amongst them that could detect our presence. Michael was a bit apprehensive once he heard that. A cultivator amongst the demi-humans, that basically proved the theory that he'd been dreading to think about this entire time. The demi-humans were working with the ersatz. It would make too much sense. The ersatz were the only group that could control these magical monsters. They'd proven that in New Sparta. So Michael could only guess that the ersatz taught the demi-humans how to tame these creatures for themselves. What they wanted in exchange, he did not know yet. But he needed to. He can't let the demi-humans get corrupted by the ideals of the ersatz. So he was now motivated more than ever to finally breach through the defenses of this chasm and reach the demi-human kingdom. The only problem now was the fact that the magical monsters were prowling the dark caverns. Right now, the Rebornian army was safe. They were hidden in the dark, a few hundred meters away from this place. And with the two conglomerate armies here, the magical monsters would be too occupied to reach them. This would give them the element of surprise. They could rush through to that wall on the other side and breach through to the demi-human kingdom. But once he did that, he was 100% sure that the demi-humans would quickly turn back to protect the wall from being breached. That would mean about 50 or so magical monsters coming at them at the same time. Most of these creatures had the brute strength of a nascent spirit cultivator, which was not something that normal body formation cultivators could deal with easily. But thankfully, the Rebornian army was not normal. He turned towards Caliburn, we'll go on ahead. The Lionheart Patriarch nodded. Good luck, we won't be able to aid you in whatever you're about to do, but we shall cheer you on from the sidelines. The Lionhearts were still contracted to help the Goldstone Coalition. Teresa already gave the compensation to Caliburn, so he couldn't renege on it even if he wanted to. And besides, Caliburn already knew what the Rebornians were capable of. They could do this. The Vanderbilt army once again engaged in a brutal war with the magical monsters. But this time, fighting beside them were the Goldstone Coalition led by Teresa herself. On the surface, they were working together to weather through the parade of magical monsters attacking them from all sides. But deep down, Levi and Teresa were still undergoing a different kind of battle. They were trying to see who would get the better territory. Once they defeated these magical monsters, they would be able to position themselves to the chasm walls in order to search for the demi-human kingdom. Because of that, both the Vanderbilt and the Goldstone armies were employing a hit-and-run strategy. They couldn't go all out. If they did, they would leave themselves vulnerable, which the other army could take advantage of. What are you doing? Advance, Levi shouted from one side. No, you attack, Teresa shouted back. You're just trying to make my army lose soldiers to even the numbers. You have the Lionhearts with you. Yes, and their power should be reserved. Both armies were at a standstill when all of a sudden they heard the sounds of footfalls echoing through the walls. They quickly turned their attention forwards and saw an entire army of soldiers running behind the horde of magical monsters, ignoring them as they tried to reach the opposite wall. What the hell, Levi cursed. The Rebornian army, Teresa blurted out. Are they suicidal or what? Both of them were in agreement. They're running themselves into a corner, Levi said. Then a second later he realized what they were trying to do. Could it be they found the demi-human kingdom? That's possible, Teresa pondered, but that's still so impulsive. Do they think they'll be able to do that with the magical monsters protecting this entire place? And just as she said that, the magical monsters all turned around, their noses, whiskers, and antennae sensing a disturbance behind them. There, they saw the Rebornian army rushing towards the wall, towards where the demi-human kingdom was located. A strange voice echoed into their minds, kill them. Spurred on by this demand, the magical monsters growled at the Rebornian army before they pounced at them, their eyes a complete reddish hue. Levi winced as he saw this. Even with his army and Teresa's army combined, they wouldn't be able to completely defeat these hordes of magical monsters. Meanwhile, the Rebornian army only had 15,000 soldiers. None of them have a general in the nascent spirit realm aside from Michael. This was a disaster just waiting to happen. And then finally, the magical monsters charged, their terrifying maws just waiting to rip these humans into shreds. Chapter 1305, Eternal Flame. Bright fire ignited into the swords of the Rebornians. Their light was enough to illuminate the entirety of the dark cavern as if a miniature sun had appeared. Levi, Teresa, and even the magical monsters had to shy away from the illumination of the Rebornians' flames. Their power coursed through the ground itself, creating a slight tremor that went with the same beat as the flow of flames. The first Rebornian battalion marched forwards, meeting the magical monsters head-on. They swung their swords forward courageously, undauntingly. The flames that their swords conjured were wide and overbearing, and because of that, a literal bulwark appeared in front of the Rebornian army. Made out of these flames, the magical monsters found themselves burned at the very same moment they tried to bash their way through inside the Rebornian army. First form, Eternal Defense of the Phoenix. It was at this point that Levi and Teresa stared at the conjured bulwark with mesmerized eyes. There was something about this wall, something powerful, something familiar that was tickling something on the back of their head. They'd seen this before. Where had they seen this before? It wasn't until Caliburn suddenly laughed out loud did they wake up from their stupor. "Ha, magnificent," Caliburn shouted. "Our little juniors have done well for themselves, haven't they?" "You are correct, Patriarch," said an elder Lionheart beside Caliburn. "They need a little more practice before they reach perfection, but with the amount of practice they had, this isn't bad at all." "We'll give you a reward once we get back," said another elder. Teresa put the two and two together. That wall was a manifestation of the eternal flame sword style. She wasn't able to realize it immediately. After all, she knew that the Lionhearts had only recently become allies with Reborn. Yes, she'd been told that Caliburn taught them their sacred sword style, but she would have never thought that the Rebornian army would be able to use it already. That flaming bulwark was an impenetrable wall. Even those nascent spirit-level magical monsters were of no use. The monkeys that tried to scale it would find their paws burned down to the bones before they reached the top. Even the winged creatures could not get over the structure. Somehow, the temperature above the wall was even hotter than the flames itself. They'd get turned into fried chicken within seconds. Seeing this impossible sight, the adventurers watching from the side couldn't help but express their doubts. "This is unbelievable. Aren't those Rebornian soldiers only in the body formation realm? How are they able to defend against those magical monsters?" This was answered by a wizened veteran who knew more about the art of war than most. "This is the power of an army. Individually, these soldiers will be torn to shreds by these magical monsters, but together their powers are added up to reach heights that are equivalent to a nascent spirit cultivator. Some say that 5,000 well-trained soldiers is equivalent to a nascent spirit cultivator." The adventurers turned silent upon that realization. A few seconds later, someone barked up a new question. "But that still isn't enough to fight against 50 of those nascent spirit magical monsters." The veteran adventurer nodded. "Normally, yes, but this Rebornian army had learned the eternal flame sword style of the Lionhearts. If an entire army used this sword style, their strength will not be added up together but multiplied instead. Now 1,000 soldiers will be equivalent to one nascent spirit cultivator. That is the reason why the eternal flame sword style is sought after by everyone in the world, even the conglomerates." This fact was very clear to both Levi and Teresa. They watched the Rebornian army with awe and a bit of jealousy in their eyes. They were showing the very strength of the eternal flame sword style. Meanwhile, the Rebornian army continued their defense. The 2nd Battalion separated from the main body. They split into two, going off into a flank on the magical monsters. Second form, pincers of the phoenix claws. Their swords erupted in flames. This time their fire was a little less brighter than the first battalion, however it was sharper. The flames looked like it could cut something. Suddenly, large tridents manifested next to the bulwark. Numbering in the hundreds, these weapons began to prod the magical monsters from the side, causing tremendous damage on the horde. The creatures winced and pulled back. They didn't bleed. The flames from the trident cauterized the wound the moment they were inflicted. "It's so hot," said one of the adventurers. Even though they were so far away from the thick of it all, they still felt the extreme ascent in temperature. This was all because of the bulwark and the tridents. Their flames compounded upon each other, turning the entire cavern into something hellishly hot. With these two sword forms, the Rebornian army was able to withstand the first onslaught of magical monsters, causing the creatures to retreat for a moment and assess their situation. But it seemed that the Rebornians weren't going to let this opportunity go. Michael appeared from behind them, floating in the air with a calm look in his face. The flames seemed to make his golden hair glow even more ethereally. He then took out his spatial ring and unleashed everything inside. Frozen lotus petals appeared in the air. There were hundreds of them. Their cool, blue aura was somehow able to overpower the heat coming off of the eternal flame sword style. In fact, they seemed to make the soldiers' flames weaken entirely. This was the ice petals of the frozen lotus. And it was the antithesis of the eternal flame sword style. It was the very thing that could extinguish their flames. Frost permeated the entire cavern, creating a thin layer of ice everywhere. The bulwark was not able to avoid its fate. Ice formed all over its surface, freezing even the flames into non-existence. The tridents, on the other hand, froze in midair, before the cold seemed to have turned it so brittle that even a small gust of wind had shattered them into pieces. Caliburn smiled. Yes, death is not the end, it is only the beginning for the eternal flame. Chapter 1306, Rebirth. The good thing about the ice petals of the frozen lotus was the fact that its freezing effect permeated everything. The magical monsters wanted to pounce the now vulnerable Rebornian army. With the flames gone, they could easily breach through the bulwark and reach those weak humans and make them into supper. However, the frost reached them too. Their movements slowed, with the cold making their bodies shiver uncontrollably. The only reason they hadn't frozen to death was their natural defenses as a creature at the same level as a nascent spirit cultivator. Meanwhile, Michael looked at his soldiers with an earnest look. They struggled, freezing. They could hardly even raise their swords, and even when they tried to conjure up flames, the frost would immediately snuff out any warmth that they created. Soon their feet began to freeze, their complexion turning entirely blue. Gone were their thoughts of camaraderie, of unity, of friendship. The frost took them all. Now the only thing left was their self-preservation. They wanted to live, they wanted to get out of this place. This was their death. The death of their own perception of loyalty. Many may think themselves loyal like these Rebornians. They'd sworn oaths to the Rebornian kingdom as well as to their comrades and army itself. However, when faced with death, they would all choose their own lives instead of others. This was the very reason why they haven't broken through the progress needed for the eternal flame sword style. And it was the reason why Caliburn wanted the ice petals. By killing the army, he let them confront their own weaknesses, their own fears and doubts right in front of them. Now they were given a chance. Were they going to give up and settle into the death of their loyalty, or would they fight to live on? And the answer came from the sounds they heard behind them. Strange beats echoed off from the cavern walls. Butoto, ra-ta-ta. These voices seemed like phantoms, like ghosts that had come to haunt them. Anyone who heard it would feel as if they had ventured into a haunted palace of some sort. But for the Rebornian army, this was home. The rhythmic beats of the shadow orcs had reminded them of what they were fighting for. They reminded them of what Reborn was truly about. And suddenly, a soldier in the middle of the army erupted in a fire. This time, it wasn't just his sword that was lit up with a flame. It was his entire being, his entire body and soul. And then soon after that, the next soldier found himself engulfed in a fire, and then more followed after. It was like a chain reaction. The breakthrough of each soldier had motivated the other soldiers into finally accepting their choice to live. Reborn, reborn, reborn. Their chants made anyone watching them from afar feel shivers in their body. Their hairs would stand on ends. Suddenly, their fire began to overpower the frost. The layer of ice on the cavern walls quickly melted into dew, and it didn't take long after that for the moisture to be burned up into gas. The bulwark was rejuvenated with their new fire, bolder, more fiery, more reddish with just a hint of gold. They did it. Watching this, Caliburn couldn't help but feel proud. He'd watched these soldiers go from a bumbling group of infants to now becoming a proper army who was able to achieve a good mastery of the eternal flame sword style. This was the essence. The Phoenix couldn't bring out their full power unless they experienced death. Now show them, Caliburn shouted, show them the third form. With fire now billowing in their eyes, the Rebornian soldiers all turned to the magical monsters with determined looks on their faces. They stomped their feet, creating reverberations in the ground. They swung their sword, billowing out the fire formed in the bulwark. Fire continued to gather, until a new figure emerged from atop the wall. A humanoid figure with the head of an eagle. Feathers made up his armor, making him look like some sort of ancient, mythical warrior who had worshipped the Phoenix. He raised his hand, showing a trident in his grip. Third form, Herald of the Phoenix. The Phoenix warrior raised his trident before thrusting it towards the magical monsters. Power exploded out of the tips of his trident, creating a vortex of fire that consumed the horde of magical monsters in its way. These creatures could utter no cry nor moan as they were subjected to the hellish fire of the Phoenix. Their strength may be equal to that of a nascent spirit cultivator, but that didn't mean that they had the defense of one. Without nascent armor, these creatures were easily burned into ashes. A few seconds later, the fire subsided. The Rebornian army stood proudly, their fire still raging on their bodies. They had done Michael and the Lionhearts proud. They had done the eternal flame sword-style justice. Watching this, both Levi and Teresa were at a loss for words. Reborn was a force to be reckoned with. Their impeccable coordination had allowed the eternal flame sword style to flourish at its best. They doubted their own soldiers could do that even if they were taught the same sword style. Everyone was so enamored with what they'd just witnessed that they didn't see a figure coming from the opposite wall, rushing towards the Rebornian army. This figure clad in robes emanated danger. His feat far surpassed even that of the magical monsters. He was a nascent spirit cultivator through and through. And now he was gunning for the Rebornian army, rushing towards them with no intention of stopping. He was there for the kill. Levi and Teresa started. They both looked at each other, recognizing those robes. Ersatz, they screamed out. But it was too late. The nascent spirit cultivator shed off his robes, revealing beautiful, ornament nascent armor underneath. His axe cleaved through the entire Rebornian army. Chapter 1307, Overwhelming Gold. Dealing with an actual nascent spirit cultivator was completely different from a magical monster. They had otherworldly powers, making them akin to gods compared to normal humans. The Rebornian army may have been able to rebuff the advances of the horde of magical monsters, but that didn't mean they could stand toe-to-toe against a true demigod cultivator. With a single thought, a nascent influence enveloped the entire battlefield. It felt like everything had turned mute, with no sound escaping from around the bubble emanating off of the ersatz cultivator. The eternal flame of the soldiers was snuffed out, completely. They were suffocated by the lack of sound, the lack of vigor brought by the nascent influence. If the Rebornian army were able to summon the Phoenix warrior in time, they may have stood a chance against the nascent spirit cultivator, but the most it would have done was delay it by a few seconds. Levi and Teresa winced as the axe swept through the Rebornian army. A single horizontal line of destruction and devastation crashed towards the soldiers. This would have certainly spelt doom and death for the Rebornians, if not for the strange ethereal aura that enveloped their entire body like a protective shield. Somehow, this aura was able to absorb the damage done by the axe, nullifying it, turning it as mute as the sound in the nascent influence bubble. What? Even the ersatz assassin couldn't help but mutter out his shock out loud. This should have killed every single one of these Rebornians. He should have decapitated their heads. Yet none of that happened. The Rebornian army stood tall, unharmed. The only difference in their stature was the small wooden talisman hidden in their waist. It used to be pristine, but now it had a few cracks on its surface. It had used up its first instance of protection against a nascent spirit attack. It would need 2 more attacks of that caliber before the talisman was fully destroyed. Yes, this was none other than the very same talisman that Michael bought from the System Emporium a few months ago. Uncommon branch of Yggdrasil talisman. This talisman will protect its wearer against 3/3 all-out attacks from a nascent spirit cultivator in the first stage. Michael had no need for these talismans any longer now that he'd become a nascent spirit cultivator. However, he always thought that it was such a waste. The talisman was a very powerful life-saving measure that would surely be useful for his friends, families, and allies. He'd long wanted to give one to them. However, its price was the only thing that had been the problem, so he put it on the back burner for a long time. All of that changed when the automobile business boomed. He began to earn hundreds of millions of sand dollars in a single month. He'd even become burdened by how much he earned because he didn't know where to spend them. It was only when he was building the Rebornian army with the Lionhearts did he remember about the talisman. He knew how dangerous the chasm was. It wasn't only the magical monsters that he was worried about. He was wary of Levi, Teresa, the demi-humans, and even the ersatz. Darkness often brought a lot of surprises, and there were plenty of that here in the chasm. He wanted to brave the dangers, but he didn't want to implicate his own Rebornians because of his goals. Then came the talismans. Finally, he had something to spend his billions worth of sand dollar fortune. The only reason he was so confident in sending his newly born army here was the fact that he was able to arm them all with a talisman. If he hadn't, then he wouldn't have let them risk their lives here. He would have gone by himself and chosen the stealth route with his own mini-drones. It would have been a lot riskier, but at least he didn't risk lives other than his own. Thankfully, he had just enough of a budget to splurge on the talismans. And now it has proven its worth. Michael appeared above the Rebornian army, staring down at the ersatz assassin down below. The man was caught off guard, shocked and stunned into being vulnerable. Golden nanoparticles emerged out of nowhere, floating around his body before they began to form armor that fit his entire body. His nascent armor glistened like the sun, sending shivers down to anyone who watched his emergence. With a thought, he spread his nascent influence. 2 different auras clashed, one golden, one dark. It didn't take long before Michael's superiority shattered the feeble and brittle belief of the ersatz assassin. He stumbled down, feeling the backlash of his nascent influence's destruction. Tusk ersatz will always prevail, the assassin shouted. He appeared behind Michael, axe over his head, armor glowing as it empowered his attack. The axe clashed with Michael's golden nascent armor and stopped completely. It gave no scratch nor dent, as if the ersatz assassin's weapon was nothing more than plastic. What? Michael raised his hand, pointing his finger to the assassin. A beam of unity shot through to the man's shoulder, shattering his nascent armor like it was nothing. "ARGH!" he screamed. The man's eyes reflected Michael's golden visage, and in that moment the ersatz assassin knew he was outclassed. The man in front of him was far stronger, far more powerful than he anticipated. "You will pay for this," the assassin muttered. He conjured another nascent influence, this one more subdued and encompassed only his body. And suddenly his entire figure disappeared, as if his light was muted out of reality. His entire presence disappeared. No doubt this was the power he used to keep himself stealthed this entire time. Not even Levi, Teresa, Caliburn, nor Cerberus could sense where the assassin disappeared off to. But Michael was different. 10 mini-drones appeared hovering above an empty space down below. Their cannons fired a unity gun towards the ground. But instead of pulverizing the stone floor, it instead shattered the invisible dome where the assassin hid himself. Chapter 1308, Breaking Illusion. What? Impossible, the assassin grumbled. His chest plate, vambraces, and even solarates were shattered and on the verge of breaking, courtesy of the onslaught of Unity guns unleashed by Mikkel's mini-drones. "You tried to kill my soldiers," Michael said from above. "You do not deserve death, but I will not grant it to you even if you wish for it." With a snap, a giant shadow emerged from out of nowhere and encompassed the entire ground underneath the ersatz assassin. "Hedi have." A devilish voice echoed in the assassin's head, making him look paranoid from other people's perspective. In his eyes, the shadow looked like it had grown horns and a devilish smile and eyes, but in other people's perspective there was nothing. "AHHH, help," he shouted. But he could do nothing as the devilish shadow opened its maws and devoured him whole. And in that moment, he disappeared off into oblivion, ending up in the hands of the mischievous slime in Michael's entourage. Down there, he would have to suffer Fudge's twisted way of rehabilitation. As far as Michael knew, no one had yet to come out of that place with a sane mind. Once the dust settled, Michael landed back down on the floor, letting the golden nanoparticles of his nascent armor recede back into his own body. Spirit 692-1000. Not only did he defeat an ersatz warrior, but he also gained a good chunk of spirit from that fight. It won't be long before he finally found himself breaking through to the third stage of the nascent spirit realm. Happy, he turned his vision forwards, now that they had defeated their opponents. They were finally free to enter into the demi-human kingdom. He looked towards his army. "Onwards," he commanded. The Rebornian army responded with a resounding "ha!" before they started marching towards the wall on the opposite side of the cavern. Michael put his hands on the wall, feeling the mystical properties of the mirage itself. And as he did, he realized something. This is made out of magic. This illusion would be equivalent to a 9th-level magic spell, something that would require a tremendous amount of mana and technical prowess. From what he knew, only mystic masters could create something as complex as this. No wonder no one could find the demi-human kingdom. They were hiding using a magical illusion. And since magic was gone from the entire world, no one could sense that it was here in the first place. Michael was the only one who sensed something amiss. His supreme talent could see through every single magical spell and its components. He not only could sense it, but he could also decipher and reconstruct it from the ground up. Analyzing magic spell. Reverse engineering its construction. Complete. Within a few seconds, ChatJK6 was able to create a new spell that allowed him to bypass their security. He discreetly conjured a magic circle as he applied his new spell, allowing for a tiny rift to appear in the illusion. "March forwards," he commanded his army. And so they did, even if all they could see was the wall. Even if they were to head straight first into a cold, hard stone, they would still do it. That was the loyalty they learned only recently. They were the body and Michael was their head. They followed his instructions with no complaints and no doubts. And their trust had paid off immediately. They passed through the wall and marched on forwards, allowing them to finally enter into the demi-human kingdom. Meanwhile, back on the other side of the wall, everyone in the chasm was still stunned into silence. Levi and Teresa felt like they'd been splashed with cold water. This was the power of reborn. They shivered at the thought. They far underestimated them too much. And to think they thought that if it came down to it, they would have fought a war against them. But now, after seeing that, everything seemed to be insane. "Sir Levi, they've found the demi-human kingdom. Should we follow after them?" Levi's soldiers looked to him for instruction. This was what they'd been waiting for this entire time. They fought and sacrificed, all for the sake of being the first army to breach through the demi-human kingdom. Now, they were letting the Reborn Company go there first. But what was Levi to do? Seeing that show of power had truly scared the wits out of him. The eternal flame swordsmanship was one thing. Yes, they showed immense power with their coordination. But that's not what made them impressive. It's not what scared Levi. It was that strange, protective shield that their soldiers had. He saw a nascent spirit cultivator's full-on attack get nullified like it was nothing. No armor, no magic, no ability power could do something like that. This kind of defense was something that was never seen before in this current world. And if it was, then it would have changed the very structure of warfare forever. And when Levi remembered Michael's golden figure, he couldn't help but shake his head. Such a powerful nascent armor, he was only a second-stage cultivator, yet he was displaying a strength far above that. No wonder Michael was praised as the youngest ever to become a demigod. "We pursue the demi-human kingdom, but we steer clear from the Rebornian army," he ordered. He didn't want to clash with them right now just for the rights to be the first into the demi-human kingdom. And even if he did, they wouldn't be able to bypass that magical illusion wall as easily as Michael. He had the help of Cerberus, a mystic master. Meanwhile, they only had magnetics in their midst. Levi looked towards the neighboring camp. And there, he realized that Teresa came to the same conclusion as he did. She would rather be behind rather than face the Rebornians. So both armies marched forwards and reached the illusionary wall. It would take them a few more days before they were able to break through its defenses. Chapter 1309, Demi-Human Kingdom. Michael found himself on the other side of the illusionary wall. It looked magical, like a whole new alien world still untouched by the hands of humanity. Somehow, there was a sun and a sky in this cavern. Michael didn't know how it was possible. After all, this wasn't a pocket dimension. It was part of the underground caverns of the continent, which was now only unearthed because of the chasm. He narrowed his eyes, looking up at the bright source of light above. That's another 9th-level spell. The more he knew about the demi-human kingdom, the more he was surprised. Everyone knew them as this primitive civilization who could only use wooden and stone tools. However, these high-level and complex magic spells were anything but primitive. It was innovative. Heck, even Cerberus, a mystic master, was impressed with the spell. "Amazing, I didn't know the aspect of flame could be used like that." "Oh, and how brilliant. They used the laws of Apraia to create such bright illumination." Cerberus began to deconstruct the magic spell, seeing it for the beauty that it truly was. "I'd like to meet whoever is responsible for these magic spells." "Me too," Michael replied. They continued to march onwards. All around them, overgrown shrubbery and vegetation made them feel as if they were treading towards an unknown and undiscovered jungle. Except there was no greenery here, only strange, bioluminescent moss-like plants. Bu-22. Ra-ta-ta. Now that they were in the demi-human kingdom itself, he could hear the two orc chieftains loud and clear. "Report," he told them. "We have attached ourselves to the soldiers of the demi-humans. We are currently unable to meet you at this time. There is a human here, Supreme Leader, one of those cold bastards that don't have a heartbeat. He's patrolling with the soldiers and preventing us from moving out of stealth." Michael grimaced. Ersatz. It seemed that this insidious organization had gotten ahead of him. They had gotten their hands on the demi-humans and influenced them. "How many of them are there?" "Only 5, boss, but they're all beyond our current cultivations," replied Naruto. "Nascent spirit cultivators, probably similar to the one who tried to kill his soldiers." "Boss, we did hear that their leader is going to meet with the monarch of the demi-humans," said Sasuke. "Should we risk it and follow them to hear what they're talking about?" Michael rejected the idea. No need risking his 2 strongest orcs. Their army just needs to get there before any kind of agreement was struck between Ersatz and the demi-humans. "I've got your locations. We'll rendezvous after our journey there." He looked towards his army and directed them forwards. They didn't even try to slow them. They kept their pace fast and without any intention of ever going for stealth. After all, it was impossible to hide an army as large as this. So, Eren knew that the demi-humans would eventually catch a glimpse of them and prepare accordingly. So, it was better for them to get as close to their kingdom as possible before they were alerted. "Let's get marching." His words were suddenly interrupted by a sudden voice in his head. It was Chat JK6 alerting him of something. "Intercepting signals. A message from one named Panther has texted another phone by the name of Lynx." "Isn't this how you text each other?" "I believe so. It's hard to believe the humans were able to come up with such technology when they're so stupid and dumb." LHXD. Michael couldn't believe it. He had just stumbled upon a flirty text between two lovers. And best of all, they were demi-humans. The signal was coming from the demi-human kingdom. "There's phones here." Finally, he remembered. About a few weeks ago, the Shadow Orcs did report to him that there were some neighboring allies of Reborn who were attacked by thieves and robbers who took phones meant for the citizens of Reborn. Now, thieves weren't really all that rare in that region. Reborn's reputation had gathered quite a lot of opportunistic hooligans who wished to get rich by taking from others. However, usually they only took automobiles. They usually sold the best. Those thieves took only phones, and weirder still, they weren't human. They were demi-humans. That's the reason why they were able to steal them in the first place. Demi-humans were usually allies of Reborn, so their guard was off when the robbery took place. Now Michael had put the two and two together. Those phones arrived here. Meanwhile, inside the demi-human kingdom, a single red Mankey looked at his phone with longing and adoration. These phones were usually confiscated by the monarch, but he was able to sneak one out for himself. At first he thought these phones were idiotic, useless as a rusted blade. But then he stumbled upon the social media app by accident. He was about to throw the phone when he saw the pictures on the screen. How beautiful those sceneries were! Large, towering jungles made out of metal and stone hung high in the air. Lights, colorful and bright, made unique decorations in each and every home. He'd seen human cities, but this looked different, and the humans there didn't look bad. They didn't discriminate against demi-humans like him. In fact, he frequently saw pictures and posts with humans and demi-humans holding hands together or taking each other in a friendly embrace. Could such a world really exist? Were the horizons of the overworld really this vast? The red Mankey wanted to know. He wanted to venture out of the chasm and live out there. He wanted to experience the things that he'd only seen in pictures. Those ice cream crepes looked delicious. Did it taste like moss? Unfortunately, his dreams remained simply that, a dream. They were forbidden from going out of their kingdom. Their ancestors had taken refuge in this underground haven because they were cast out from human society. They were not welcome. Chapter 1310, View from the Top. "What are you doing?" The red Mankey quickly hid his phone. "Nothing, it's nothing, brother." His paternal sibling could never understand his desire. He lived by the monarch's rule, and he made sure that everyone followed them too. Unlike him, his brother was on the fast track to become the monarch's personal guard, an honor that would bring their family great respect within their tribe. "Come on, Rowan, the monarch has instructed us to survey the horizon. It looked like the humans have finally found us." Rowan's eyes widened. They did. He eventually caught himself smiling when he heard that. He quickly punched his own mouth. Had he truly been influenced too much by this phone that he became happy when humans broke through their illusion? Why, just because there was a chance that he could get out of this chasm. "Preposterous, I'll go," he said to his brother. Both red Mankey soldiers climbed atop the kingdom's sacred tree. It was the very body of their worshipped deity. It towered over everything, with its crown almost reaching the top of the skis and the sacred sun itself. Because of that, it allowed them to survey the demi-human kingdom with ease. So it was easy for them to spot the human army now marching towards them at top speeds. "Only 15,000. "Lauren, don't underestimate him," said Rowan. His brother tended to think of humans as lesser than them. However, Rowan saw the pictures on the phone. If they could build such majestic structures, something that even they could not do, then that meant that they were a lot more powerful than them. Lauren scoffed at the thought. "Brother, how are they not idiotic? They are coming towards our kingdom clueless of the true power that we hold. They'll get destroyed by our monsters even before they graze our sacred tree." It seemed that the other red Mankeys in their troop copied that sentiment. They laughed as they looked at the army of 15,000 men marching towards them. "But how were they even able to break through our illusionary wall?" asked Rowan. "Isn't it supposed to be invisible? Wasn't it protected by a horde of our tamed monsters?" Rowan's trepidation about the whole thing fell to deaf ears. They didn't seem to make a big deal about how the humans were able to breach their kingdom. These humans may be simple, but they have lots of numbers. They probably just bashed their heads in the wall until they were able to get in. Lauren's words caused the rest of the red Mankeys to laugh. Ever the charismatic leader, Rowan's brother was. In contrast, Rowan just kept to his corner. He looked down at the army of 15,000 soldiers. Then he couldn't help but stare at a single figure amongst them. A young human with golden hair. He seemed to command respect from the soldiers around him simply by walking amongst them. Was this their leader? Rowan asked himself. Why did he look familiar? He didn't understand it. Usually in their culture, seniority reigned supreme. The older one was, the wiser and stronger they were. Since the monarch was the oldest demi-human amongst them, it was only natural that they led their entire kingdom. But this human, he was too young, and in company with other more older counterparts. And yet he was able to command them. How? Rowan was intensely curious, then his heart skipped a beat. He saw me, Rowan burst out loud. He quickly hid behind a branch, his heart beating out of his chest. Lauren and his other troopmates suddenly laughed amongst themselves. Lauren, looks like your brother had another one of his accidents. Hearing this, Lauren snarled at the other red Mankeys. Shut up, all of you. Then Lauren turned to Rowan. Brother, he saw me, he looked straight at me. Lauren placated his younger brother. Rowan, that is not possible. We are a mountain's width away from them, and even then, our sacred tree is protected from the sights of anyone who dared to come close. They wouldn't even see our tree, all they see is an open space in the forest, so it was impossible for that young human to see you. He's too young. Despite Lauren's best efforts to calm his younger brother down, Rowan still couldn't let his chest settle down. He was sure that that young, golden-haired human looked straight at him. And he smiled. The human smiled at him as if he could see him. You're right, brother, it's probably just a coincidence, Rowan said to himself. But in truth, he didn't believe his own words. He was never going to underestimate these humans ever again. What's up, Michael? Michael smiled as he looked at the horizon. Nothing, just saw an interesting sight, a red Mankey with a phone. Cerberus's eyebrows raised. Wow, I don't even see anything. That was true. After all, the giant tree in the horizon was hidden from view, but thanks to his supreme talent, he could see through any kind of illusion of magic as if they were transparent. That must be their kingdom. With his destination set, he eventually ordered his mini drones to spread out and start to conquer the skis of the demi-human kingdom. He'd need every bit of information he could get. And with his drones, he'd be able to form a dynamic map that was up to date with the movements of every single demi-human in this jungle. Of course, he eventually sent a few of his mini drones to come close to those red Mankey soldiers. He wanted to see what they were doing with his phone. And most importantly, he wanted to know what the airshots were planning. Surely, they didn't come here for nothing. If they had struck a deal with the demi-humans, then that meant that they needed something from them. Michael had to know what, and get it before they got it. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. This is Jason Audiobook, and I just want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you for staying all the way through. Whether you're listening to relax, to escape, or to dive deeper into these incredible worlds, your time and support truly mean everything. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows more stories to come to life in audiobook form. You're not just listeners, you're part of this journey. If you have a web novel you'd love to hear turned into an audiobook, don't hesitate to send me a DM. I'm always looking for new adventures to bring to the channel, and your suggestions could be the next big story we dive into. And if you're enjoying the content and want to support even more, consider checking out the Patreon for exclusive early releases, bonus chapters, and behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, stay immersed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.